Okay, hello and good afternoon to everyone joining us today. And happy Water Awareness Month from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. I want to quickly remind participants, please mute yourselves during the presentation so that we can all hear the presenter. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So during that time, I would encourage anyone interested in asking something, please unmute yourself or type the question in the chat and I can read that for you. This webinar is being recorded and it will be shared through the ADWR YouTube page for anyone who missed it and wanted to catch up on that. I'm going to provide a brief Water Awareness Month introduction and then we'll continue with our webinar. The Arizona Department of Water Resources and our water conservation partners from around the state invite you, your family, and your neighbors to join in the celebration of Water Awareness Month, or WAM as we like to call it. The WAM website was first launched in 2011 and is overflowing with ideas and activities to help you learn more about water conservation and become more aware of our state's most precious resource, water. The availability and quality of our water supply is critical to our quality of life. Therefore, this essential and precious resource was recognized by Arizona's governor in 2008 with an executive order that designates April as Water Awareness Month. Many thanks to Arizona's water awareness partners from around the state who contribute events, tips, and resources to the website and help promote water awareness. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar titled Saving Water in Your Home, Yard, and Business with EPA Watersense. So Tara O'Hare is from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Tara currently serves as the Implementation and Commercial Outreach Lead for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Watersense program in Washington, D.C. Tara has worked on Watersense for the past 13 years and is responsible for program operations, partner support, and outreach to commercial and institutional facilities. Tara led the development of Watersense at Work, best management practices for commercial and institutional facilities, and has delivered trainings and webinars to a wide variety of stakeholders from all parts of the commercial building sector. Ms. O'Hare has a bachelor's degree in business and environmental management from the George Washington University and a master's degree in environmental science and policy from the Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Tara, and thank you very much for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Welcome, everyone. I'm here to talk to you today about saving water, both at home, outdoors, and at work. And so we're going to get started on the next slide. Why should you, we're going to have a few things that we talk about. We're going to talk about why it's important to save water, give you a quick introduction to Watersense, and then we'll talk about some ways to save water indoors, including through products and practices, as well as leaks. And then we'll talk about outdoor water use and water savings as we cover landscape and irrigation. And then I'll go over some quick Watersense resources and get to your questions. Next slide. So why should you save water? Water is a huge resource that's very scarce in Arizona. I pulled the actual drought historical data from the U.S. Drought Monitor. And basically, the darker the red color, the more serious the drought. So as you guys can see, it kind of happens every 5 to 10 years. This is just in the past 20 years or so. You guys are coming out of a serious drought that you had back last year, but you're also still pretty far into drought. So it's very important to make sure that you're saving water wherever you can. The other reason is not just because of drought, but water and sewer bills are increasing all over the country and very quickly, faster than inflation. So if you want to save water, you can also save money and energy at the same time. Next, many consumers say that personally reducing their water use makes them feel like water consumption is more important to them as well. Next slide. So I wanted to pull the actual current status of drought so that you guys can see, depending on what part of the state that you're in, what kind of a level of drought that you're in. The entire state is abnormally dry, which is the yellow portion at least. And then as you get into the darker colors, like the tan color and the oranges and reds, you can see that at least 75% of the state is in moderate drought status, as well as several parts of the state, about 25% are in severe drought. And so it's really important for you guys to pay attention to your water use everywhere you go, basically, to try to help relieve some of those drought issues. Next slide. So just a quick introduction of the WaterSense program. We focus on 3 different areas to try to help save water. And so one of those that's the cornerstone of our program is products. WaterSense created a label to identify products that save at least 20% compared to their standard counterparts and perform just as well. When low flow products first came on the market back in the 90s, they didn't always work so well. So WaterSense works to put a performance criteria into each one of our specifications so that you know that you're getting a product that will save water and actually perform well. Then we also have practices that we talk about. We have all sorts of them. They're for landscapes, for whether that's commercial or residential. We have our best practices guidebook, WaterSense at Work, that you can use while you're at work. And so these are just some resources to talk about ways that you can save water through your behaviors, as well as, in addition to saving water through products. Then we also focus on our people. We have partners all over the United States that are working to reach consumers and businesses to try to help them reduce their water use. Next slide. So the WaterSense program has labeled in 8 different product categories, including homes, and we have more than 39,000 product models that have earned the label to date. And so you can see that we have most of the products that are found within a commercial and residential bathroom. So you'll see we have both toilets that are found in residential homes, as well as those that are found in commercial buildings as well. We also have flushing urinals and shower heads, as well as laboratory faucets. So there are many options across the different price points that are available for these products, and they're found across the United States. And then in addition to those indoor products, we have outdoor products as well, including 2 types of irrigation controllers. One is the soil moisture sensor controller that actually will sit in the soil and determine whether or not it has enough water, and will skip an irrigation cycle if it does have enough water. There's also a weather-based irrigation controller that takes data from a local weather station to determine whether watering is necessary. We also have spray sprinkler bodies, which are used to control the pressure within a sprinkler system to make sure that it's not overwatering or underwatering because of the pressure in the system. Next slide. So how do we use water at home? We put together a chart so that you guys could see a pie chart so that you can see how much water is being used in different areas. Approximately 70% of water is used indoors and about 30% of water use is outdoors. But that can really get higher in arid regions like Arizona if you're irrigating your lawn on a regular basis. You can also try to compare if you want to look at your water use to find out how much is being used outdoors versus indoors. You can compare your summer water use to your winter water use, and that can kind of tell you how much is actually being used for irrigation. But in general, restrooms are the biggest amount of water that's used indoors for the most part. So as you can see in the pie chart, toilets, shower heads, and faucets are huge, as well as clothes washers. And then leaks are a significant portion at home. They're about 12% of water use, which is really completely unnecessary. So that's one of the targets for saving water. Next slide. So what can you do? One of the big things that I'm going to talk about today is checking for leaks, especially with toilets. And you can also twist on an aerator, which is basically a little piece of, it has a screen and it goes on the bottom of your faucet where the water comes out. And that actually can be saving water just by itself. You can twist one on and twist it off and twist a new one on. You can also replace an older shower head or toilet with a WaterSense labeled model. They're in all different price points, so there's a lot of options available. One of the big behaviors that you can do, some of them are turning off the water while you brush your teeth or shave. That's a pretty easy one that everyone can do, as well as take shorter showers instead of baths. Whenever you're doing laundry or doing your dishes, we encourage you to wash full loads to make sure that you're using the water as efficiently as possible. Next slide. We put together some drought fact sheets so that you guys could kind of see what behaviors and changes that you can make within your own home as well as within a business. So I just pulled the one for at home for basically residents and homeowners associations, but we have them for all different types of buildings. So one of the big things that you can do is follow your utilities rules. I'm sure you guys have seen this many times in Arizona, but the utility will often dictate whether you can water your outdoors or not. And so if there is a water restriction, you need to make sure you follow it. You can also look for leaks both indoors and out. We're going to talk about that a lot today. And then you can consider a bathroom upgrade like we just talked about to try to make sure that you're using water as efficiently as you can. Then you can also take a break from watering your lawn. There is quite a bit of research that says that if you let your grass grow a little bit longer and water it less frequently, it actually helps out the grass be stronger and more hardy. And so that's something to consider, as well as letting it go dormant when there aren't heavy rains. Then you can also go the extra mile and reuse water. So for example, when you're waiting for when you turn on a shower and you wait for that water to heat up, you can collect that water in a bucket and use it to water plants outdoors. So some of them can be really simple things that don't necessarily take a lot of effort. Next slide. So we wanted to also give you a profile of how water is used in commercial buildings and institutional buildings so you can kind of see the differences. We pulled together some profiles of the 5 most common building types, and so that you can kind of see that across the board, you can see that blue line at the bottom of the chart, and that represents the water used in restrooms. It's consistently about 30 to 40% of water use, so it's a really good target for water savings. Next, you can see the red bar, and that's for basically your cooling and heating systems. So that's your mechanical systems that you might find in a building. And that's about 30% of water use, give or take. And then the green portion is your outdoor water use that's used for watering your landscape. So that can be really dependent on the size of the landscape. And so that's something to really pay attention to as well. Next slide. So water savings in restrooms, as we mentioned, can be 40 to 60% of water use. So it's a really good target for water savings. Older fixtures that were installed before 1994 use 3 to 5 times as much water than the regular standard models. So if you have an older toilet, especially, it uses a ton of water comparatively to your newer fixtures. A lot of the water that can be saved in this area is dependent on user behavior. So it's really important to kind of educate people and make sure that they know what they can do to save water. So taking shorter showers is one of them, and making sure that you can twist on that faucet aerator to save water as well on your faucet. And also in this area, regular maintenance is really vital. You have to make sure that you inspect your valves and replace worn parts at least every year. Unfortunately, these types of products break down over time with the actual valves and the flappers and the rubber portions that are inside them will often break down over time. So it's important to make sure you stay up on your maintenance. You can also adjust your automatic sensors to avoid, this is mostly in a commercial building, but to avoid double flushes or phantom flushes where it's just flushing when no one's using the toilet. You can also make sure that you adjust your sensors on faucets so that they're not running longer than they should be. And then when you have, often scale will build up on, and biofilm will build up on fixtures, especially faucets and shower heads. So that's usually that white substance that you can kind of see, especially on a shower head, you can see where it's kind of there, where all the little water comes out. And so that's important to clean that regularly to make sure that you remove it, because it actually will restrict the water use and make it not work as well. So it's important to take a look at that, whether you have that at home or in your commercial facility. Next slide. So how do you verify water use in restrooms? Because it's really important to make sure that you're verifying it over time so you can catch problems. So one of the easy things to do is if you have a residential toilet, like the one you find in your house, you can use food coloring or dye tablets to see if you have a leaky toilet flapper. So what you do is you put the actual like dye tablet or the food coloring in the tank of the toilet, and you wait about 10 minutes. If you see dye in the bowl itself, you have a leaky flapper, and those cost about $3 to $5 and are pretty easy to change out if you have a problem. The process gets a little bit different when you have commercial fixtures like commercial toilets and urinals, and that's really a timed flush test where you just kind of see how long the flush cycle takes, and you can actually compare that to what it's supposed to be and find out if it's actually running longer than it should be. Then with faucets and shower heads, we recommend a timed flow test. You can get a flow gauge bag, which is in the picture on the right here, and that's just basically showing you volumes of water. You can also just use a Tupperware container or something that you know the volume of, and you just kind of measure that over time and see how much water is coming out. So that's basically to figure out if you're using the right amount of water in that fixture. Next slide. So as I mentioned, leaky toilet flappers, they can waste about 30 gallons a day or 900 gallons per month. So they're pretty significant. They're pretty cheap. They're less than $10 and they're pretty easy to change out. It's just in the tank of the toilet. Then you can also, as I mentioned, install WaterSense labeled faucet aerators, and those just twist onto the end of the faucet, and they really cost like less than $10 again, and they're really easy to do. Anybody can do it to twist one on. So that's a really good way to reduce the water use from a faucet without having the performance be affected. And then if you have an older shower head or an inefficient one, we would just encourage you to replace it because you really want to make sure you find one that is a WaterSense labeled model, because we made sure that it includes performance criteria in the specification, and that's to make sure that you're still getting a good shower experience even though it's using less water. Longer term, if you can, we encourage you to replace those older toilets and older fixtures with WaterSense labeled models. And in many cases, utilities have rebates for these products. So when you're considering doing a project, just contact your utility or check their website to see if they have any rebates available for you. Next slide. So this is just a chart to show you the flow rates of the different fixtures. All of them are 20% below the national standard, and they all perform just as well. The only thing we don't label currently is public restroom faucets, and that's because the national standard is already very low because it's only used for hand washing. So the moral of the story is, if you're looking to replace a product, look for the WaterSense label, and you can find ways that save water that way. Next slide. So what else can you do? WaterSense puts together campaigns throughout the year that can give you lots of ideas of what you can do at home and at work to save water. So in March, we just had Fix Leak Week last week, and that's where we just encourage people to look for leaks in their homes and their businesses and fix them. The one coming up in April or May is Sprinkler Spruce Up, and that's basically just to encourage you to go around your sprinkler system and make sure all the sprinkler heads are in working order before you turn on the system for the season. Then we also have information on outdoor water use and drought during July, but you can use that information year-round, as you guys will need it year-round as you're in drought. And then in September and October, we usually talk about restroom water fixtures. Restroom using water fixtures. So that's another one that just gives you more ideas of ways to save. Next slide. So more things that you can do. We have a bunch of information on our website that you can use to educate your friends and family on actions that they can take. We're talking about a lot of them today. You can also use Test Your WaterSense, which is just a calculator that we have so that you can calculate your household water use. And it can be helpful just to kind of see what your profile looks like. Then, as I mentioned, ask your utility if they provide rebates for the efficient products. We also have a pledge that you can take and gives you just some ideas of other ways to save water as well. One of the big things that we've found to be really successful is to engage kids in this process, because many of them are excited about learning things and they're excited about finding ways to help their parents as well. So it can be really important to engage kids. So we have a whole kids game that we have available that's like Pac-Man, that teaches them about water wasting monsters. Instead of chasing ghosts, they chase monsters. And so there's things that we also have, just coloring books. We have worksheets and puzzle sheets and other things like that that you can use to engage your kids. If you're looking for an activity to do with them on the weekend, can be a good one. You can also visit the Watersense website for other water saving tips. Next slide. So next I'm going to talk about leaks because it is 6 to 12% of your water use in any facility, and so it can be really significant. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, unfortunately, water use in water saving fixtures in restrooms will break down over time. This is just because of the way that they're designed. Unfortunately, rubber and plastic and other metal components can break down over time, and it won't always stop working when it's broken. That's one thing that we try to encourage people to understand, is that if you have an energy product, if it breaks the circuit, it'll stop working. If there's a problem, it usually just stops working. But unfortunately, that's the opposite of what happens with a water using product, because it will often leak and use extra water that you don't even notice. And so it can be really important to make sure you're checking in those fixtures, as I mentioned before. And all of this is because all of this leaking and continuously running water really has no added value. So you're basically paying for the water twice. You pay for the water as it comes into your building, into your home, or into your workplace, and you pay for it to be discharged to the sewer system. So if you're paying for all this extra water, it's pointless, and you really want to make sure that you stop that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, Fix a Leak Week is our big call to action to help you find ways to reduce leaks in your buildings, in your homes, and at work. So right now, in general, leaks can come up to 10,000 gallons per household per year, which is really significant when you think about it, because that's a whole bunch of water that you don't need to use or pay for. So there are some ways that you can do that. So checking for leaks is one of them. You can also twist on the aerator and tighten your pipe connections, because sometimes they do loosen over time and you just kind of need to tighten things up under the sink, for example. And you can also replace the flapper in your toilet, that rubber piece that closes when it's finishing the flush cycle. And you want to make sure that, that's one that you check, as we mentioned, and any fixtures that you have that are older. Next slide. So what does a leak look like? Many utilities have portals now that you can log in online and see your water use in real time or close to real time. And so that's one way that you can kind of check in on your water use regularly. And this is just an example of what that looks like. This one was a toilet flapper that was stuck open while an employee was at work. So as you can see, it's pretty significant in terms of water used. 1,200 gallons isn't nothing. So the water bill jumped in this case from about $16 to $23, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if it's happening over time, you're just paying for all this extra water that you don't need to. Next slide. So our Fix a Leak Week is held annually in the third week of March. We just had it a couple weeks ago, and we're planning to have it in the third week of March again next year. And during this time, a lot of our utility partners will hold events and other campaign related things. And so just kind of take a look at some of what your utility is doing. They're often doing a lot of really great, awesome things that can help you save water. So this is one time to check it out. We even have road races where people are dressing up as toilets and running down the street so people can catch the running toilet. So it gets pretty creative with what's going on. So it's just cool to see and gives you some more ideas of how you can save. Next slide. So giving you guys just a sense of what this looks like in terms of what a leak looks like, we wanted to give you just a reference with a garden hose, because everybody kind of knows what a garden hose looks like. So if you see the one on the left-hand side of the screen, it's about 1 gallon per minute of flow. And so that's kind of a lower flow out of a garden hose. And this can cost up to $4,000 per year. And this could be happening behind the scenes. So if you're looking to the right side, that's a garden hose at full flow, and that's about 6 gallons per minute, which adds up to about $25,000 per year. So if you have this going on behind the scenes where you are just running extra water through a fixture, or that there's continuously running water in your mechanical systems, for example, in your cooling and heating systems, then it can really add up very quickly. Next slide. So what can you do? You can be a leak detective. This is one of the things that we talk about during Fix a Leak Week. So one of the tricks that you can use is to read your water meter during off-peak hours. So when people aren't really awake or aren't really using the fixtures, you can use that to see if the meter is moving while there's nobody using the fixtures, you know you have a leak. You can also compare your monthly readings of your water meter through the utility portal, or you can do it yourself actually, and just compare your readings over time and see if there's an uptick in your water use. So when you're looking at this, you're going to see an increase in seasonal water use, which is basically in the summer when you're using extra water to water your landscape outdoors. You can also do things like we talked about with the dye tablet or food coloring to check if your toilet flapper is leaking or stuck open. And that's one of the easy ways that you can see if your toilet at home is having a problem. At work or at home now, they have a lot of leak detection devices that you can use. Some of them will actually just monitor your water use over time, and if there's an increase, it'll send you an alert on your phone or an email, and that can, give you the time to take action and stop that from, that leak from continuing so that you don't pay all the extra money. Then we have what are called failure abatement devices, and these are usually with commercial buildings, especially in like heating and cooling systems. And these will actually just shut off the flow if there's an increase that's significant. You can also look and listen, walk around your home, walk around your workplace and see if you hear any dripping water or flowing water that shouldn't be there. You can look for discharge to floor drains, especially in commercial buildings. You'll see a drain on the floor, and if there is water going into the drain, there's probably a problem. Then outdoors, you can look for puddles or other areas where there's a lot of water just hanging out, and that could be, an indicator of a leak. Next slide. So while you're at work, especially, we really encourage you, if you see something, say something. So we encourage the facility managers to post signs in restrooms and other areas of water use like kitchens to just tell people what a leak looks like, why it's important, and more importantly, just give a phone number of who to contact if you see a problem. So you can actually train your staff to help you look for these leaks if you have staff, because that way, you're not the only one. You can't be everywhere. So you want other people to be your eyes and ears on the ground and report leaks so that you can fix them. Next slide. So we also have some infographics and some checklists that you can use to try to find leaks within your facility or your home. We also have a bunch of events that are happening throughout Fix a Leak Week. We have some information on our website, some templates that you can use for those signs to put in your restrooms, and to just encourage people to report the leaks when they have problems or when they find problems. So you can have, if you have a green team at work, it can be really good to kind of just challenge them to help you find leaks and report them. That is probably a good way to start to reduce your water use. Next slide. So now I'm going to get into some of the outdoor water practices that can help you save water. Next slide. So why should you look at outdoor water use? One of the big things is that outdoor water use is a primary driver of peak water use. So water utilities have to size their system for the largest amount of water that it's being used. And often that capacity isn't being used. So it really, this is an area outdoors where it's a really appealing target for utilities to look to reduce their demand. And so it can be one of the first uses, as we know, I'm sure, that to be restricted during a drought or other shortages. So, and it's really easy to police. So you really want to make sure that you're following all of the water restrictions in your area and not giving the utility, any problems, basically. So you also want to make sure that you're paying attention to your outdoor water use, because it can make the rest of your water use more expensive. Often, if you use over a certain amount of water, it'll place you into a higher tier or cost tier where you're paying more money for each gallon of water that you're using. So you really want to make sure that you're looking at that so that you don't actually use a whole bunch of extra water and get charged more. And then you want to protect your investment in plants and other landscape features to make sure that they're not dying. Often overwatering plants is more dangerous to them than underwatering. So it can be a really good place to look for water savings. Next slide. So what can you do? You can think before you plant. We encourage everyone to look for drought tolerant and native climate and regionally appropriate plants to plant in your yard or at your facility. And you want to really make sure that you're finding those plants that are appropriate for your area, because they won't need as much extra water. They'll be familiar and prepared for the water use in your area, so they don't necessarily need as much supplemental water. Then we want you to avoid putting plants on steep slopes, because the water will often, as you try to water them, the water will just flow down the slope and won't actually be captured by the actual plant. We encourage you to also install rain gardens that kind of help collect some water if there's a large rain event, and can be used to water your landscape as well. We try to encourage people to design their water landscape in hydrozones, or plant plants together that have similar water needs, so that you can just irrigate those in the way that they need to be irrigated. So if you put all the flowers together, or you put all the turf grass together, you can then water that area specifically for that type of plant. Then we also encourage you to take care of your soil, to aerate it as much as you can to improve the infiltration of the water, so that the water gets to the plant roots as much as it can. And then also to use some mulch when you can, to reduce the amount of water that's being evaporated from, after you water. You don't want the water to just be evaporated. And then you want to manage your grass before it manages you. You want to plant your grass strategically so that it's for functional use. Like, we encourage people to avoid strips of grass that don't really provide much of a function. And you can also raise the blade on your mower a little bit, because the longer the grass grows, the more hardy it becomes. The roots get deeper and it becomes a more hardy plant. So we also encourage you to minimize the fertilizers and chemicals that you use. This goes back to some of those native plants, because you want to make sure that you're planting things for your area, so that you don't have to do a whole bunch of supplemental water or supplemental fertilizer, for example. Next slide. So what else can you do? You can water wisely. So you want to know your plant's actual needs and not overwater them. If you're going to water, do it in the early morning to avoid evaporation as much as you can, and avoid watering in the wind, because it's not going to go where you want it to go. And then you want to check your irrigation system for leaks if you can. I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. And make sure that you're changing the schedule with the seasons, so that, for example, in the summer, you're giving more water to the plants that need it, and you reduce that in the fall when it gets cooler again. And you don't ever want to water your street or sidewalk, because the concrete won't grow. And so it's really important to make sure that the water is getting to the plants and not to other things. And then also consider a rain shutoff switch or a Watersense smart irrigation controller to shut it off when there's rain events, so that you're not watering on top of while it's raining. And if you need help, we have a bunch of professionals that have been certified by our programs, that have certified their knowledge of water efficiency, that can help you. Next slide. So irrigation As much as 50% of the water used outdoors for irrigation is wasted, and this has been found because of poor system design, improper maintenance and installation, lack of maintenance, and improper scheduling. So it's really important to make sure you're on top of your irrigation system if you have one, and to make sure that it's working as it's supposed to. Next slide. So these are just some examples of what some outdoor water waste looks like, and it won't always be this obvious. The one on the right is actually a sprinkler head that came off, and it's called we call it a geyser, because it's actually just blasting water up and not actually watering anything that it's supposed to be watering. So sometimes it looks like this when there's a problem. Other times it's just going to be a puddle or something that's not as obvious because it could be underground, where sometimes the land will kind of sink in a little bit where there's a leak underneath it. So those are things to look for if there's changes to what your landscape normally looks like, that you're looking for that and making sure that there aren't puddles outside, because all of those are examples of problems with your irrigation system. And we encourage you to audit your system every 3 years using an irrigation professional, because they can help you make sure that it's still working as intended and that there aren't any problems. Next slide. We put a link there so that you can find professionals on our list that have passed our test. So you can find ones in your area as well. Then we could have created some checklists that can help you look for some of these problems in your landscape. We call it Find It, Flag It, Fix It, where you just find problems basically and make sure that you fix them. So these are just ways, we already talked about most of them, but to, just give you a checklist of what to look for. Next slide. We also put together some guidelines for outdoor water use. We have a Smart Water Landscapes Guide, and that one just kind of helps you plan for a regionally appropriate or native plant, basically yard. So we have a bunch of pictures on our website as well of what some alternatives to turf grass look like. So you can see that there's a lot of really beautiful lawns and really beautiful landscapes that can be put together with regionally appropriate plants, native plants, and it'll actually use a lot less water. We also encourage you, if you can, to use micro irrigation, which is a drip irrigation system, and this uses really low volume of water and a lower rate, so that you can actually make sure that the plant is absorbing that water in its roots. And they're a checklist as well. I put some links here so you can go to them after this presentation and check them out. Next slide. So it's dry out there. It's especially dry for you guys in Arizona. So what can you do? This is just a summary of what we've already talked about, but to walk your property and check for any broken or misdirected sprinkler heads and water the plants, not the pavement. You want to get a handle on your outdoor water use to do a quick inventory and just compile the information that you have to get the whole picture. Then also look at your water bills and monitor them over time so you can see if there's any trends. You can see differences or spikes in your water use as well. And we encourage you to use regionally appropriate or native plants whenever possible, because they will be more acclimated for your area and will require less maintenance and less water use. And as I mentioned, to allow the turf grass to grow longer before cutting it. Next slide. So we put together just a slide of what your resources are for at home. This is another one of our campaigns that I didn't talk about, but it's called Your Better Yard. We put a poster together of some of the different ways that people use their yards and ways that they can save water in those instances. So for example, if you have a lawn that you require a lot of turf grass, if you're out there playing games with your family all the time and you just really need that functional turf grass, there's some things that you can do in that situation to save water, which would be different if you are in an urban landscape where there's a lot less turf grass needed. You may be able to do other things. So I encourage you guys to check some of this stuff out and find ways that you can save water for your needs. Next slide. We also have a bunch of resources that you can use at work. We have information by facility type. We have our best practices guidebook. as well as a lot of water saving tips and assessment tools. We have worksheets and checklists, and I actually do a series of webinars on commercial water use. And if you're interested, we do those throughout the year as well. And then we have a bunch of case studies. So next slide. We have a couple of these checklists that I just wanted to list out for you. Some of them are to do an assessment of the facility's water use, and others are just what to look for when you're trying to operate and maintain your facility. So it can just be the operation and maintenance checklist can be a good one if you're just going to go around and look for leaks and other problems, because it'll point you out to common areas where there are leaks. Next slide. This is just an example of what that checklist looks like, and it just kind of gives you some ideas of what to look for at each different type of water using fixture. Next slide. This is what our best practices guidebook looks like, and it covers basically every water using type of fixture or piece of equipment within a commercial or institutional building. We also have ones for multifamily buildings as well. Next slide. So I think that's it. I'm going to open things up for questions. And I also, at the end of this slide, hopefully they can send the slides out to you guys. I added some things about pools and spas. So if you have a pool or a spa, you might want to take a look at some of that stuff. It's also on our website as well. So I'll open things up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tara, for that presentation. So yes, if you do have questions, feel free to enter them, type them into the chat window. I can read them out, or feel free to unmute yourself if you'd prefer. I did want to start off with a question. So I think there's a lot of very good information in here. I think there were some very good ones, especially low-cost solutions, things like the aerator and the toilet flapper, as well as just like fixing leaks around the house, very inexpensive solutions. What I'm curious, if say there is a family with maybe a limited budget and they realize, okay, we have enough money to maybe replace one appliance, we're not sure which, do you maybe can you advise a little bit how someone might decide how to prioritize where that money might be better spent if they have a limited amount?
Yeah, so if you have a limited amount, I would look and see how old your fixtures are, your restroom fixtures, because that is a huge portion of your indoor water use. So if you have an older toilet from before 1994, I would encourage you to replace those. There are ones that are Watersense labeled that are like $150. So they're relatively cheap, so that you can find ones that aren't going to break the budget. But so I would encourage you to check out your toilet and see how old it is. Check out your shower head, because that one's going to be a big one as well. And if you are finding that those ones are relatively new, you might want to look and see how old your clothes washer and your dishwasher are, because they use about 20% of your water use within your home. So if you have an older dishwasher or clothes washer, you can find ones that are Energy Star labeled that save water as well. We worked with them to put water criteria into their specs so that we could make sure if you looked for the Watersense or Energy Star label, you'd find something that was efficient.
Okay, perfect. All right. So open it up. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to interject here. So let's see. I think we can see a moment. I think that was a very informative presentation. So thank you again very much. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining us. Great. Oh, excellent. So here's that information on the pools and spas you mentioned.
Yes.
Okay. So let's see.
Take a look at the help section.
Yeah, so these are just some things that you can do to save water in your pool and spa, because they do use a significant amount of water, but I know everybody still wants to have one in Arizona, especially. So
Right, that's very useful. So again, anyone interested in watching this presentation again or any of our WAM webinars, we are going to post those on our YouTube page. I'm going to go ahead and share that link now. Let's see. Okay. And yes, we do have lots of useful, interesting webinars planned over the next few weeks. So we're going to have, let's see, we have the history of the Grand Canyon and the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center and the science of forecasting stream flow next week. So we'll be putting a lot of information also on our WAM website. I'll share that link as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and end it. Thank you again very much for joining us. And thank you again, Tara, for joining us for this presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.